The advice provided in this podcast is general in nature. For your specific situation, you will need to get in contact with your local OT, vehicle modifier or mobility dealer and set yourself up with an assessment or a trial. Trials really do put you in the driver's seat, so get out there and get one going. Before we get started, we just want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors who make this show possible: Mobility Engineering, Driving Well, and Williams OT. This show takes time and money to put together, and we are forever grateful for their passion for our industry. Okay, enough of the business. Let's get on to the interview with Jenny and Brad.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Drive Able podcast. I'm Jenny Gribbin from Driving Well Occupational Therapy here in Brisbane and Queensland, and with me is my my trusty co-partner in podcast, Brad Williams from Williams Occupational Therapy in Adelaide. How are you, Brad?
Good, thanks, Jenny. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. I was trying to come up with a clever description for you, but I absolutely failed.
I'm just a co-host. That's all right. No worries. Let's go with that. That works for me. I can work with that.
And so,
who we got on today, Jenny? Today
we're talking with Sarah Collison from Verve Occupational Therapy in Sydney. So Sarah is...
We're national, aren't we? We're national. You're in Brisbane, I'm in South Australia, she's in Sydney.
Yep. So Sarah has been an OT for many years, but she's been around in the NDIS space for 7-8 years or so. And she's really been a driver and big voice and leader within NDIS space and helping us work out what is going on, help us work out how to do assessments and how to navigate the system. So I am very, very excited that she's coming to chat with us today. And yeah, especially with all the changes that we've been talking about. And Sarah is a really person that's been really, really keeping up to date with all the changes in legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we have recently recorded, Jenny, episode 90. Now, episode 90 was released immediately because it was a hot topic straight away, okay? And we released that in late August it was, early September, when it was a hot topic, when the bill had recently been rolled out and approved, or not rolled out, approved, and the changes that were proposed were happening. Now I'll give you this, we're actually recording this in early mid-September, okay? So it's actually going to come out a little bit later than that, but I just want to reference when this chat was taking place so people can get context for that. But please go back and listen to episode 90, where Jenny and I really unpack what the NDIS bill and reform bill, what our original thoughts were and the impact on the driving space. And this episode, I'm hoping, might go into that a little bit more. We'll see what happens.
Let's have a chat with Sarah, Brad.
Mobility Engineering is Australia's leading automotive product supplier for disability customers. We have installers all across the country, over 100 of them, and we have the largest range of mobility products for vehicles in the country. Get in touch with Mobility Engineering for any of your driving solutions.
Hi everyone, I am really excited to get into today's interview with Sarah Collison from Verve OT in Sydney. Hello Sarah, how are you?
I'm good. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, welcome to the Drive Able podcast. You're no stranger to podcasts, but it's the first time you've been a guest on ours, so we're very excited to have you. Can you start by just, we'll get you to introduce yourself and tell us about yourself and Verve OT.
Oh my goodness.
Anything else you want to tell us about?
So I am an OT, obviously. I'm based here in Sydney. I have my own private practice, Verve OT, which I started, will be coming up to 6 years actually in November, which is very exciting when you hit those milestones. Definitely. I think my husband thought I'd probably do it for 12 months and then get bored and do something else. But this is actually probably the longest job that I've had, which is quite exciting. So And I think it's because I finally found my area of passion and what I really enjoy doing, which is great. So, yeah, I started Verve OT almost 6 years ago. It was just going to be myself at that time. I was really happy that I would just get enough referrals to just, do my own thing. And then I suddenly got more and more referrals and had to take on team members. And so now we've got about 45 OTs that work for us across Sydney, predominantly doing NDIS work and some aged care and some eye care work as well. So,
gosh, that's really grown over the last few years. We've been up to 45 teams.
It is. And it's so funny because I'm doing my rehab. So I had spinal surgery, as some of you might know, 5 or 6 weeks ago. And I'm doing my rehab at the moment at the private rehab hospital where I used to work before I left to set up my own practice. And I actually set up the NDIS therapy service for them there. And yesterday, one of the physios said to me, "Oh, what will we need to do to try and get you back here?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, that's never going to happen." So I'm like, I don't think you realize what I've gone on to do. Sorry, but yeah, that I will never come back here. And it's a lovely place. It was a great place to be, but for me at this stage in my career, I just need something more. So yeah, I also run Verve OT Learning, which is the training side of our business. So we run training for OTs in the NDIS space on all sorts of things, from clinical to NDIS related matters. And Jenny you run some of our training workshops for us, which is fantastic. Yeah, so that's, and I should mention the OT Community of Practice Facebook group as well. So that's our online community of practice that's been running since 2017 and has just reached 11,000 members, which is very exciting.
That is, I want to unpack a little bit of that because there's so much, there's so much in 6 years from when you went, I'll start a little business by myself. That is rapid growth. I mean, that's seven OTs or whatever it is a year. That's significant growth. What training did you have? How did you grow a business that big? How did you take those steps? Because that's really significant.
Yeah, actually, because when I reflect on it, even just between February and April this year, we onboarded 6 OTs in the space of 2 months. So it is a lot. I think for me, I don't know, I'm one of those A-type personalities that kind of makes a decision and then goes, that needs to happen right now, or yesterday even. And so I'm very quick to act. I do still take time to think about things, at least overnight, but then I want to act on it as quickly as possible. And I think there are some of my team who kind of, it just drives them a little bit crazy because I'm like, right down the road, let's get it done. And they're like back there going, can you just slow down a bit, please? Just give us some time. But I think I am just very proactive and just very motivated. I just want to see those things happen. But before I left that private hospital I used to work at, I was at the kind of last Christmas party event that we had, and they did like a little team activity where you had to write on a piece of paper a word to describe everybody sitting around the table. And when my piece of paper came back to me, at least half the people at the table had written down the word ambitious. And I was actually really upset at the time because I took it to be quite a negative thing. And I sat down with the CEO afterwards, who's also an OT as well, kind of see her a bit as a mentor to me. And she said, don't take it as a negative. It just means that you know what you want and you're going to work hard to get it. And I've kind of gone with that and gone, actually, yeah, that is, you can be ambitious and ruthless. Those are very different things. But for me, I'm just ambitious and passionate. And I think it just means that if I can see that goal ahead, that I know what I want and I'm just going to work really hard to get to it. And I think I just have worked really hard. But I've also worked really hard to surround myself with people that will help me to do that as well. I can't claim that I've done it all on my own because I haven't. I didn't set up the NDIS OT community of practice. It's something that I feel like I always have to correct because it's a bit of a myth that I must have started the group as well, but I actually didn't. It actually started by a group of OTs in the Hunter, Newcastle area during the time of the trial phase of the NDIS because they were looking at a way to connect with one another and to share ideas and to share experiences and to troubleshoot things. And I just took it over after a couple of years and kind of have brought it to where it is now. But, it came about from people that wanted to make things better, that wanted to do things well and were really prepared to step out and say, how can we do this by networking and connecting with each other rather than working in silos? So I've always tried over the last few years to find those like-minded people that could help me and that I could help them, so that we could all excel and progress together. So I think it's definitely come about from that as well, of recognizing that we each have these talents that we have, and sometimes there might be a gap, and who can we help get us to fill that gap so that we can move forward and get those things done that we need to get done.
Isn't it funny,
It's
as
fantastic.
women, we like the connotations on just some different words and attitudes, that as women, that it's not okay to be ambitious.
I know, right?
It's not okay to charge money for your services, but it is, you know, like money's a dirty word.
And when I mention, when I mention that I also have 3 kids, people look at me like, when do you sleep? And I'm like, I don't know, I just get it done. I don't know. But I think when you find something that you're really passionate about, it doesn't feel like it's hard work. It just feels like you're doing the right thing, and you're passionate and you want to spend your time reading about it or looking into it or talking about it because you enjoy it. And like for many years, I worked in workplace rehab, which, I mean, I think I still look back and am surprised that I lasted as long in workplace rehab as I did, because it has a very high burnout rate, similar to the NDIS does. But at that time, I was really passionate about it. But as soon as I stumbled into disability, I just love it. I just love seeing the difference that we make for people, that, you know, what I do means that someone can have their great life that they wanted to have. Like one of my very first approvals from the NDIS was for a young boy who was 8. He'd never walked up and down the stairs in the family home. He'd always had to be carried up and down by mum and dad. He had muscular dystrophy. He really wanted to be independent. I managed to get a lift approved. It was the first home mods application I actually got approved, $150,000 lift. And I was like, wow, like this is great. But the best part about it was, you know, when that lift was installed, his mum sent me a photo of him on the toilet. And she's like, this is the first time he's gotten to the toilet on his own. He didn't need me to carry him there. Like he got there because he could get in his wheelchair and go up that lift and get to the bathroom. And you did that. And you know, those heart-sing moments where you're like, oh my gosh, like I made that happen. Like I did. And it's such a beautiful thing. And the way it makes you feel, you just want to go, I just want to do that again. I want to have that feeling all the time. And like, I think one of the issues we have with the NDIS at the moment, which I'm sure we'll get to the issues with the NDIS, but is sometimes it feels like those heart-sing moments are few and far between at the moment, because there are delays and because it's taking so long to get approvals, and
we've got to fight so hard to get them.
We've got to fight so hard, right? And so it's hard to sustain yourself because you're not getting that little hit of dopamine or that heart-sing moment that goes, yes, I can keep fighting. And I guess my message to OTs out there is just think back and remember what it felt like, because we will get back to that. It's just we're in a really crappy place at the moment, but I do still have hope that we will get back to that. So
with you, I'm with you as well, and it's about motivating the team to stick with it, because the government can't be Indian givers where it says, you know, here's something, now we're going to take it all back again. I just don't believe that they can do that. Now, yes, it's going to go through a period of ups and downs while they redo policies and procedures and things like that, but I don't feel that they can give something so significant and then take it all back. So the NDIS is going to be there. It just might look a little bit different, and we've just got to ride these waves while it goes through this period, I think. But who knows? I might be completely wrong as well. But that's the hope that's out there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
For our listeners, we like our listeners, Sarah, are it's, you know, focused on driving and vehicle mods. So our listeners are combination of participants and clients and families that are interested in that side of things, as well as OTs, as well as, you know, the vehicle mods industry. But we and Sarah's not a driver trained OT, but you've got driver trained OTs that work within Verve. But we invited Sarah onto the podcast because of all of the work that you have done within the community of practice and leading through that space, that we I think it's probably no secret that most of us refer to you as the NDIS OT guru. And there are several gurus, which we are, so appreciative of having. But it just made so much sense with all of the things that are happening within the agency at the moment that Brad and I invited you, and it's really quite timely. So our last episode, Brad and I had a bit of a chat, just a one-on-one sort of unpacking what had happened with the bill being passed, and the draft supports list being under the consultation ongoing. But tell us what's going on. What's going on with the NDIS?
So I think what we're seeing here is, I think we're seeing policy that's being done on the run. I think we're seeing a government that's in a hurry to save money. Not sure why they're in such a hurry. I don't know if that submarine contract's gone up or what's happening there, but I feel like there's this real kind of rush that we need to save money. And look, I understand, I presented to some of my membership last week about the changes that we've seen over the last 10 years. And it was only ever forecasted that when the scheme was kind of all done and dusted, we'd have about 460,000 participants on the scheme, and we're over 550,000. So we've obviously exceeded those numbers quite significantly, and that wasn't budgeted for. I totally get that. So, but I think that, there's a rush to try and rein things in, and in doing that, there's a real risk that people are going to be left behind, or people are going to be left without supports that they genuinely need. And I think that's what we saw in that draft support list that was presented, was a government that doesn't actually understand disability very well, doesn't understand the nuances and the complexity of, for example, why young people with autism need to have a driving assessment or have specialized driving lessons, that it's not always just about physical disability, that there's lots of other disabilities that need to be considered, that, we can't, define people by a single impairment. Often there are multiple impairments. So I saw a post on LinkedIn last week from someone who's deaf-blind saying, well, how's the NDIS going to figure that out when it comes to my impairment notice? That, well, which one is it? Because the two are very much intertwined. And I think it's really sad that, after 10 years of this scheme running, where we've seen such amazing things happen in the building of capacity and the improvement in the lives of people with disability, with that choice and control, that we still see a government that doesn't understand what it means for people with disability in this country. So, and I'm really concerned about how it's going to change the scheme and how it's going to change access to necessary supports for people with disability, whether that be for driving or for daily living or for community access, whatever it might be. I think there's a real risk with foundational supports that it's going to be very much dependent on your postcode. The foundational supports are now going to be run by the states. What someone in Tasmania is going to get is going to look very different to what someone in New South Wales is going to get. How do we ensure that there is equity across the country for people with disability? How do we ensure that the programs that are delivered for people in the Northern Territory, for example, are going to be the same quality as those delivered in Victoria? And I'm just, very concerned about what it might look like in 5 or 10 years' time. And my kind of view at this point is that whilst it might seem to the government like a quick fire way to save money, I actually think in the longer term, it's going to cost them a lot more. I don't think we're going to see the same gains in capacity building. I don't think we're going to see those same kind of dollar savings that we see at the moment when we recommend a piece of AT or we get someone to driving, and what it means for them to then be able to work or access the community and participate. And I think that it will take a while for that to be seen, unfortunately. And we'll probably then have another shift in 5 to 10 years' time when they realise that, oh, actually, we were so short-sighted at trying to get those short-term savings that we missed the fact that this scheme actually saves a lot of money. It was really interesting. Last week, we ran the Road Ahead community of practice event with Senator Jordan Steele-John. And last week, the GDP figures showed that actually the NDIS is keeping the economy afloat at the moment. And you kind of have to wonder, well, if you're going to start making these massive changes to a scheme, which is pretty much the only thing preventing this country from going into recession, what's going to happen in 1 or 2 years' time when we start to see the impacts of the changes to that scheme.
It just doesn't make sense, Sarah. Like, if the GDP is saying that it's keeping the economy afloat and preventing recession, why is the federal government wanting to slash a whole, like, we're talking not like 1% of the funding. They're talking
We're
like
talking a huge
30% of the funding.
That's right, massive chunk of funding. And
doesn't make sense at all.
you know, the last quarterly report showed that they had saved some money already, and it was kind of interesting to me how that was, you know, being celebrated in the media. And it's like, actually, if you're on the ground and you're working in the NDIS, you know that those savings have not come from a reduction in fraud. You know that the savings have come from your participant who calls you and says, I've just been ambushed with a sudden plan review and my plan's been cut by 50%. You know, we've got clients who are calling us and saying, you know, they rang me and said, we're doing a plan review and I have to provide this. And so I did it. And then 3 days later, I get a plan and it was dated a week before that phone call even happened. I've seen another one today where a client has said, they actually didn't tell me that they changed me to agency managed. I was plan managed. All of my providers are unregistered, and now they've moved us to be agency managed simply because they can. But we don't have any supports that are registered. So what do we do now? Like the celebration of we've saved money is actually coming
at everyone's expense,
at everybody else's expense, and we're not talking about, you know, people that are living the high life. We're talking about the most vulnerable people in our society who don't always have the means or the supports available to advocate for themselves. And I think it's going to really, you know, lead to many allied health professionals and other people within the scheme to have to push a lot more and push a lot harder to say this isn't good enough. And I think one of the things that concerns me the most is that, you know, the Australian public has really been bought into a lie with what has been presented in terms of what this legislation is going to do. It's not about fraud. There's nothing in the legislation that has anything to do with fraud. It is all about cutting people's plans and giving people generic funding where they have to then just make it work, and it's no longer tailored to their needs. And I think that that's a real shame that we've moved away from that individualised planning, or we're about to move away. We know that it's coming in with effect from the 3rd of October. Some of the changes for the new legislation. And yeah, we're not going to see those same fantastic outcomes that we have been over the last 5 to 10 years.
And what really bugs me with all of the aims to save money is that there's from what I can see, there's still the same amount of red tape and bureaucracy to have to navigate through. And, you know, as a health professional, it's hard, let alone for someone that's, you know, not necessarily, you know, that's a lay person and someone that doesn't have the skills to, you know, to be doing that. Go for it, Brad.
I spent 3/4 of the day yesterday on the phone to the NDIS trying to figure out why plan managers are coming back to us saying that specialised driving instruction, we can't draw down this money from the portal. So we've had 5 invoices rejected in the last fortnight for specialised driving instruction. And we ring the NDIS and they're going, well, I can't see why that's not working. Must be a glitch in the system. That's what we got to after 3/4 of the day on the phone, backwards and forwards and producing evidence on this invoice hasn't been paid. This invoice hasn't been paid. Here's the evidence that it's been approved, so on and so forth. And yet, or the thing that comes back is that the plan managers have been advised by NDIS that the participant needs to ring the NDIS to get an answer, all individual cases. What's the participant going to know about money being drawn down by a plan manager from the portal? It doesn't make sense. We're going round and round in circles. We still don't have an answer after 3/4 of a day on the phone
or a payment.
Yeah.
So
and I take
it today.
This is for someone who's having specialised driving lessons. Like, this is in their
They're
plan.
already having them.
That's
And then
funded.
all of a sudden, oh, we can't pay this bill. It's like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? It's so frustrating. But it's not just that. It happens every day. Day in, day out. There's always a problem with someone, something, all this red tape that we're talking about. It's not just the amount of steps that you have to go through to get something. It's all of the failures. It's all of the difficulties.
Troubleshooting.
It's all of the, this worked for this person. We follow this system day in, day out for trying to get something approved or so forth. And then tomorrow, for this next person, it doesn't work. It does, for some reason, it hits a roadblock, and we have to try and figure out why it hits this roadblock and start all over again and figure it all out again. It's so frustrating.
It is.
As a business owner, and I feel with all these changes, there's going to be a lot of burnout. There's going to be a lot of turnover in OTs, physios, speechies, allied health in general. There's going to be a lot of people wiping their hands at the NDIS and saying, I'm done. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Well, let's not forget we're in a massive workforce shortage across the board, right? There are lots of other sectors that need OTs, not just the NDIS. So it's not like it's going to be hard for people to go, actually, yeah, I am done, and I'm going to walk away and walk right into a job, because there are other areas where they're begging for OTs to be available. So, and unfortunately, I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I think the big thing that's about to kind of hit everybody will be this supports list. I think that that's going to be a massive, massive change in thinking, and a massive shift in how we have approached how supports are funded by NDIS in the past. And I think one of the issues is going to be, well, we know that the draft support list that went out was not fit for purpose. It's just a mess. It does not consider disability in the way it needs to be considered.
Do you think they're going to listen to the feedback that came through? Do you think they're going to listen to the feedback, or are they just going to go, oh, we did the list, not really listening, here's the list anyway?
I feel like maybe they will listen a little bit with that, because we did already hear Bill Shorten kind of admit, oh yeah, we got it wrong on the whole menstrual product thing. So I think that there might be some things that they will listen to, but I'm not sure. And look, the thing that is interesting just to understand about the legislation with the support list is that with the support list, it requires there to be a new NDIS rule, okay? And for that rule, there's a requirement that all of the states and territories must agree to that rule before that can go out, okay? However, in the legislation, there is a thing called a transitional rule, which does not require the agreement of the states and territories. So whilst
I
there's
think that's
been
starting on the 3rd. Is that right? Is that starting on the 3rd of October?
The legislation comes into effect on the 3rd of October. So realistically, whether or not that rule, that transitional rule, will come into effect on the 3rd or not, though we don't know, but it could, right? It could under the legislation. And that rule can be in place for 12 months before that agreement is made with the states and territories for that final rule to be put together. So they could then put through whatever they want, really. And that consultation then might continue in the background with the states and territories about what the final list of supports will actually be for that final rule to be created. But can you imagine the havoc that's going to cause for participants and providers to be kind of operating under a transitional rule for maybe 12 months and then be moving to another rule? Like it's insanity. Yeah, it's insanity, absolutely. The other thing that we're quite concerned about is that obviously there are about 60,000 people awaiting change in circumstance requests at the moment. 60,000. Yeah, was the last figure I heard, and that was a few weeks ago. So now obviously under the legislation there is now a kind of a definition as to when someone can request for a change in circumstance. So they need to be in either like a life-threatening or crisis situation, or they need to be in a situation where there has to be evidence to basically show that they're sorry, I'm just going to find the wording because I don't want to get it wrong. So if we can just cut that bit out, what I'm saying, just so I can make sure I get it right. Sorry.
Oh, we're not that technical, Sarah.
You're not that technical.
We don't do that kind of editing. This is live type of stuff.
Okay, all right.
You put you under pressure.
You are.
But it's okay. While you find it, we can.
So I've got it.
Bluff.
It's all right. So crisis or emergency funding because of a significant change to a support need. Or the participant has experienced fraud or financial exploitation, or it's to prevent or lessen a threat to their life, health, or safety. Now, my concern is with all of those change of circumstance applications that are currently in, if they haven't specifically kind of used some of that terminology and kind of ticked off that criteria, they'll potentially just be declined automatically after the 3rd of October.
So for people that might not have tuned into all of it, can you read that out again?
Yeah, so going forward with the new legislation, if someone needs extra funding within the plan period and they want to do a change in circumstance, the NDIS will only approve and accept that if there was crisis or emergency funded needed because of a significant change to their support needs, or the participant had experienced fraud or financial exploitation, or if it's to prevent or lessen a threat to the participant's life, health, or safety. So previously in the current legislation we're operating in now until the 3rd of October, there was no threshold that someone had to reach before the NDIS would agree to reassess their plan. But under the new legislation, when it comes into effect from the 3rd of October, that is that criteria that would have to be met. So my concern is that if people haven't evidenced that in those functionals or the support requests they're putting through now as part of those change of circumstances, they'll potentially just be automatically declined come the 3rd of October. And so I think there's probably a piece of work that we need to do now as a community of OTs to actually go, okay, it's pretty clear if crisis or emergency funding's needed, but let's pull apart how do we prevent or lessen a threat to a participant's life, health, and safety? And how do we ensure that that evidence we put forward in our functional reports clearly shows how that is being met? Because that is what is going to be needed going forward from the 3rd of October if someone wants to put in a change in circumstance. Now, if someone needs a new piece of AT or if they need home mods, we are usually able to link that pretty well. There's a concern for safety, there's a risk to their well-being, or there's a risk to caregivers being able to continue to care for them and things like that. But often if we're just doing a general functional assessment as part of a person's plan review or a request for a reassessment of their plan, we may not specifically touch on those things as clearly as we would in an AT report or a home mods report. So I think that's something that OTs need to be really aware of, that when we're making those recommendations and presenting that evidence, we're going to have to really show how is it going to lessen a threat to their life or their health and safety.
Well, can we just unpack that a little bit for
Yeah.
driving? And this is a
Yeah.
driving podcast.
Driving and vehicle mods content.
Yeah,
look,
so we're
absolutely.
talking about capacity building.
Yes.
Where does capacity building fit into that terminology? There's no, like, for driving lessons, specialized driving lessons, or even a car modification, that's a quotable item that needs to be added into the to the plan as we go along. So it's really going to have to be a very specific goal to start off with, is what I see, is that driving needs to be highlighted in that plan review right from the start, not just about building capacity and independence as a vague goal, but really specific about driving for something to be added in along the way. Or am I misinterpreting that and being hopeful and that's not going to be added in and these are going to be left out?
The current process is that someone's had an injury and they've gone through all of their rehab and they've got a permanent disability and they need hand controls or whatever they need to be able to return to be a driver independently, and they can do that. They've got capacity to learn, they can do the transfer, we can meet all of the other criteria and come up with a solution, as well as training lessons and everything to get them competent. But it doesn't ever fall within the plan. Like the actual the point in their life journey and their rehab journey hardly ever fits into the plan date. So what we normally do as driving OTs is work with the person as to where they're at and say they might be middle of their plan, they might be 3 months in, they might be 9 months in, it could be anywhere willy-nilly within the actual plan dates. But if we've done their assessment and they're ready for that application, we've done all of that assessment and trial and made the recommendations, we submit it and it goes in the queue and it gets picked up by a planner. And sometimes they do, like, I don't even know if the term light touch is still a thing, but they do a review of the plan. Sometimes it might be classified as a change of circumstance because that person has the circumstances have changed and that they're ready now to pursue driving. But I don't know moving forward. Like, will that person just have to wait until their new plan?
So there is a change under the legislation separate to the change in circumstance thing, which I was referring to about plan variation, that actually says that a plan can be varied without a whole new plan having to be issued. Now, it doesn't give us any example of that though. So we're kind of making the assumption that common sense would say that that would be things like AT or a home mods or a driving vehicle mods request, right? Where you're not needing to actually change anything else within the plan. You're just needing to vary one particular aspect. So the hope is that that would actually deal with that so that it wouldn't become a whole change in circumstance. But the detail's just not there at the moment to confirm that that's the case. But certainly when I heard Lloyd Walker, who is the director of AT at the NDIS, speak at ATSA earlier in the year, he made reference to that change around plan variation to remove that from that whole of plan kind of update. And so I'm hopeful that that is what that will mean. So yeah,
That's positive.
So are we. So are we. We're hoping
fingers crossed.
Yeah,
that actually,
because,
I think that would be the only positive thing to come out of the legislation, right? That you could actually just vary the plan rather than have to issue a whole new one when an AT request goes in. We have still got, at our last count, we have 20 applications for AT and home mods that have been with the agency since November, December last year that still have not been processed.
Disgusting. Just disgusting.
It's outrageous because they're all being backlogged and held up with all of these change in circumstance applications and everything else that's in there as well. And one thing that was shared again by Lloyd Walker at ATSA was that 50% of the planning team within the agency have been there for less than 12 months. They're fresh, they're green, they're not experienced. It's taking them much longer. We have a much higher number of requests that are going through. And look, I have heard people say, oh, look, there's a higher number of requests going in because people are trying to get things funded before the legislation comes in. But I mean, the backlog is such that that's just not going to happen. And my understanding is that when that new legislation kicks in from the 3rd, it replaces what else was there. So that's why I say if those change of circumstances are in, and let's say that new support rules list comes in on the 3rd, if you're asking for something that's not on the list, it just will be automatically declined. The other thing that they have not clarified yet is people at AAT. There's a lot of people sitting waiting at AAT at the moment, and it's not clear if the new legislation is going to be applied to their cases as well. Now, I would think
so for the people that's a bit of jargon. What's AAT?
Sorry. So the AAT is the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. So if you've ever had to appeal a decision that the agency have made, you would go to the AAT. And obviously what the AAT is looking at is, did they make that decision correctly in relation to the rules and the legislation? So if the rules and the legislation changes, what's not clear is if the AAT will consider it against what was there previously or what the new rules and legislation are. Now, I would think it'd be very unfair if you have been battling it out at the AAT for the last 12 months, only to have it completely overturned because those rules and legislation no longer exist. So there's a lot happening at the moment. It's heavy stuff, I think, that participants and providers are having to kind of deal with and navigate and make sense of currently.
There's another component that we were talking about, the draft supports list. That was something that Brad and I discussed just recently, because and you kind of mentioned it earlier, that the draft supports list definition of specialized driver training, and I don't have it in front of me, so I can't say word for word, but essentially said for adapted and modified vehicles. So referring to is really only the physical, providing specialized driver training for people that are having modifications to physically operate a vehicle, which leaves out
a massive
chunk of the population. And you mentioned autism, but it also leaves out anyone that's had a neurological condition or executive function, cognitive.
Our client yesterday passed his test using his right leg prosthetic. That's no modification to a car. He had to learn how to adapt his prosthetic. Like that's a physical disability. So
but with no modification,
that's not going to fit underneath the definitions. So I don't know how that'll get judged.
We We
Very much unknown.
the National Driving Task Force has taken that to OT Australia, and they've taken that to the NDIS, is my understanding, to raise those concerns, which is very positive. Don't know the outcome of that conversation, but one of the other pieces that my understanding that they've put in the legislation is this concept of substitution.
Yes.
Thoughts?
Very interesting how this is going to work.
Yeah.
And I think understanding the nature of that term is quite important. Obviously, substitution means that you are taking something away and putting something else in, and that's how the substitution rule will work. So if there is something that is on the yes list of supports, if you can show that there is something on the no list that actually would get you a better outcome or would be better value for money, you can request to substitute that for something that's in your plan that's on the yes list. So an example of that might be, and sorry, I can't make this a driving one, but just a general one, perhaps if we've got someone who is unable to wash their own hair, okay? And so what they would prefer to do is just to walk down the road, go to the hairdresser, they'll do it for $25, and the job's done. Whereas the alternative would be, well, if you have to get a support worker to come out, it's generally got to be at least a minimum of an hour. That's going to cost around, $60-something an hour. So rather than have that hour for a support worker to do that, I want to substitute that with a hairdresser. It's going to cost less. It still gives me the same outcome. NDIS want you to approve that, right? So that is how the substitution rule would work. But what's not clear is, well, what's the process for that going to be? I mean, NDIS is currently sitting at 9-10 months for massive AT and home mods requests that they can't even process. How are we going to manage a substitution rule for individual support items for hundreds of thousands of people? Do we have to somehow predict that at plan review? And if people are now getting 3-year plans, how do we predict what someone's going to need in the second or the third year of their plan? And can you then get a substitution as we go? Or there's no information about how it's going to work. So it's another kind of piece where I think it was kind of brought in as people are complaining, we've got to put some sort of amendment in to make that work. Let's just chuck this in. But in reality, it's logically, how's that going to happen? I can't even fathom how they'll deal with it.
There's just no consideration, is there? No consideration.
One of the facts that you just pointed on there, Sarah, was the 3-year plans at the moment. And that was something post-COVID that really kind of came in. It was people were having yearly type of reviews and people were staying on top of their plans. And then at COVID happened and people were just having plans roll over and they were just rolling over into 3 years because the world was in flux with COVID and people couldn't go in and do their plan reviews. Now we're getting to the end of that. And that's 2021 to 2024. They're all kind of happening this year. But what we're seeing is people having new plans roll over for another 3 years without really another consultation in between. It's just being rolled over and the same money's being put into the next account, whether it's ease, whether it's, I don't know how that's actually happening. A 3-year period in our life, Jenny, for a 16-year-old is massive. Absolutely massive. So much changes between 16 and 19 or even 15 and 19 in that period. The world changes. I remember when I was 18, my world changed. Some of it not so good, some of it good, some of it we won't touch on. But the world changes when you become an adult and your life changes and you've got to start all of a sudden becoming independent. If you've got a plan that rolls over, and that capacity building's taken out of it and those goals aren't redefined again.
And it was the funding amount was based off what they'd had in the previous plan where they might be
mum and dad
13, 14, 15 really aligned to mum and dad.
But the other, we often use this term unintended consequences, right, when we talk about the NDIS and the decisions that they've made. But one of the other unintended consequences of doing those plan rollovers is they're not being done in pace. So we also have this PACE rollout that started in October of last year. And what was meant to happen was that every person was going to have, when they had a plan review, they would have a proper review and they would be given a PACE plan, right? Now we're in, what are we in? We're in September. So almost a year into that rollout, which was only ever meant to take 18 months. For the last few months, to get rid of this kind of backlog, they've just been rolling plans over, but they're not putting them in pace. They're rolling them over in the old system. Now, all we've done is extended this point in time where we have two systems that we're working off, one which is PACE and one which is the old system, which for providers is a
It's a
real
nightmare.
And so, and nobody can kind of say, well, like, when is this going to end now? Because you've just extended it essentially. And
3
you've
years
brought
or
in this
more.
new legislation. Like, it's just one of those other things where I think they just kind of are in such a hurry to get things done that they don't think about those unintended consequences of all the other things that were kind of in the works as well. So who knows how long this rollout will take now. I was trying to actually find some numbers of the percentage that have actually transferred over, but I can't find it. So, but I imagine it would be somewhere maybe in the quarterly report. But yeah, that's also another thing that's happening in the background as well. That we're operating off two systems currently.
So, and people are going to be listening to you, Sarah, and going, man, that lady is full of knowledge about the NDIS. Let's talk about Verve OT Learning and the NDIS Community of Practice Facebook group.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about what is Verve OT Learning?
Oh, look, it only came to be a few months ago, simply because everything was under Verve OT and we really needed to separate it out. But look, the training side of Verve OT has always just been about sharing that knowledge and expertise with as many OTs as possible. So it kind of started, it was about 4.5 years ago now, and it did come out of the NDIS OT Community of Practice Facebook group, in that we could see a lot of posts from OTs that were really struggling to navigate the scheme. They weren't aware of the processes, they kind of didn't know the steps involved, and they couldn't find that information anywhere. And I really kind of struggled with it for a little while of being like, well, what right do I have to be telling OTs how to do their jobs? But I kind of saw it as, well, I can't see every NDIS participant that needs to be seen and give them that service that they need, but I could certainly give that information to other OTs, and then they can make sure that they give that to their clients. So we started off with NDIS 101, which was essentially what it stands for. It's just like, let's just understand this scheme. What is a planner? What's a plan manager? How do you read a plan? How are budgets put together? Like, really just to kind of give people that sense of, okay, this is what it all means, and now what do I do? And it really just flowed on from there. So we then looked at, well, how do you navigate it if you're doing AT, or how do you navigate it if you're having to do home mods? And so really the training workshops are a way for OTs to know how to navigate the scheme competently so that they get great outcomes for participants. That's really what it was about. And obviously I'm not the expert in anything and everything. So that's why we then got other OTs to come in, like Jenny, who's happy to share, for non-driver OTs, what do you need to know about driving assessments? If you think your client needs one, what do you need to recommend in terms of the hours? What do they need to be aware of if they're going to engage in a driving assessment? So that we could have really competent OTs out on the ground, making sure participants will get the supports that they require. So the training side has really just been about education and learning and sharing that knowledge and expertise. And it's evolved. We've now got a podcast that we do, which is, again, it's just about, let's have a chat every week. What's happening? Let OTs know what's going on out there, so that we stay connected and we stay informed and we stay kind of ahead of everything. I think for a long time, the OT community has kind of always said, we want to have a seat at the table, and we want to be there, and we want to talk about what we think, and we want you to come and ask us. And I just genuinely believe that time is over. We actually just need to be much more vocal, and we actually need to be a lot more forceful than what we have been, because I don't think we're working with a government or an agency that actually wants to come and ask us for our opinion. So I think
consultation didn't even have a category that you could tick that you were a health professional.
No.
I was astounded. I don't know why I was astounded, but I was astounded. Like, they're not wanting our input.
No, they're not. And so I just feel like we actually need to be more on the front foot with this, and actually be saying, you may not want it, but we're going to give it to you. So, and I've mentioned the other podcast, and we've recorded this week as well. And a lot of that episode this week was saying, put a few OTs in a room together, we can solve most problems in the world. Like, we're pretty good at that. We're problem solvers, right? That's the nature of what we do. You put us in front of someone and we can work out what they need and how we're going to get it. And that's what we do. But We can do that when it comes to policy and advocacy as well. And I think that the kind of big thing that needs to be on our agenda is support needs assessments. This is another thing that's tied up in this legislation. And we need to be positioning ourselves to say, if you want to be able to identify what support needs someone has to help inform their NDIS budget, there is one profession that will do that really well, and that's the OT profession. That is how we are trained. We currently do it. We just don't call it support needs assessment. Currently, we're calling it functional assessments, but essentially it's the same thing. We identify impact on function. We recommend what supports are required as a result. That's what we do, right? So rather than sitting back waiting for the NDIS to come and ask us, because probably they won't, we need to be out there saying, and this is what it should look like. This is what we can do for you. These are the standardized assessment tools that will work. These are the ones that won't. This is what a functional assessment means, and this is how you need to invest in it. Look, we could even develop a template for you if you like. There's so much we need to just be putting ourselves out there and saying, no, like, let us lead this for you. Like, because I think if we sit back and we don't do that, we're just going to be overlooked. And what will happen is people will not get the supports they need in their budget, because that support needs assessment will not be well informed. It will not be well structured, and it will not be delivered by the right profession to deliver it.
When it won't identify what that person needs to have a good life.
If we look back at,
I was going to say, have you got any advice of how we can do that? How can we get ourselves out there, Sarah? How can OTs put themselves in the spotlight?
So I think that OTA need to take the lead on this as our professional peak body, and they need to work with OTs on the ground to do that. And I know they're very willing to work with us. We have an NDIS reference group. I'm a member of that. Lots of fantastic OTs across the country, and we need to come together as a bit of a working party and say, let's actually put this out there and put that proposal forward. In terms of individual OTs on the ground, I think that as a bit of a grassroots thing, I think we need to start talking in this language about what it is we're currently doing at the moment. As I said, we're calling it a functional assessment, but it is a support needs assessment. We are recommending the support someone requires. So let's start using that terminology. Let's make it really clear that's already in our domain of what we do, already in our scope of practice. And I think it's important that as OTs, we really recognise that role that we do play. I've seen a lot of posts in the last few weeks about things that the NDIS are asking for in terms of what has to be in a functional assessment at the moment, in terms of recommending support worker hours, in terms of being really clear and detailed about, why a person needs the support that they need, and why a person, is requiring assistance, and what it is they're providing assistance with. And I think as OTs, absolutely, we should be able to provide that. That's part of what we do. We're trained in task analysis. We're trained in breaking down sequencing and steps of tasks, where we can identify where the problem lies and how we can fix that, or how we can bring a support in to address that. I think one of the issues we have, though, is that we can't recommend what a physio is going to need in terms of the number of hours. We can certainly recommend a physio might be needed, but I don't think we can make that recommendation about how many hours. So I think we need to start talking with the physio community. We need to talk with our other allied health partners. How can we work on this together? If the NDIS do want this really nice, comprehensive whole of package support needs assessment, how can we come out with a solution where we can confidently say this is what would be required? How can we do that? So I don't have the answers on that now, but I just think it's communication and collaboration. We're all in these little individual silos as allied health professionals. We need to take this together. And I know we have ARPA, which is the Allied Health Professionals Association, who are in there representing allied health professionals as a whole. But I think on the ground, we need to start having some conversations together on how we can work with one another.
I think Sarah, you and I were on a very impromptu panel at the very close of the OT Exchange conference back in June, and we were, I think, the part of that big broader answer and how we put ourselves out there, I think it is just being a lot more vocal around the impact that we've created and showing and highlighting that. So I think a lot of OTs have been trying to do that, like on socials and showing their the work that they've done with their clients. We've certainly been doing a lot more work, and Williams OT are very, very good at the social media side of things, but also in our professional social networks as well through LinkedIn, and I think there's just always room to have our voice heard through those channels as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think there's a few kind of campaigns that have been around the last month or so off the back of the price guide release, and the removal of high intensity supports, and obviously the price freeze. And whilst I understand that like the freezing of the price is a problem for a lot of providers, and it makes it really hard to operate, I think if we step back and we look at the bigger picture of the overall reform and the changes to the legislation and how the scheme operates, kind of doesn't matter what the price is if we actually don't have a service to provide because we've been locked out of the scheme. So I actually think we need to step back and focus on what do we actually do at the moment for the scheme? What are we doing on the ground in terms of building capacity, improving independence, ensuring safety, saving money? That is the big thing. We add so much value for money, but we don't talk about it enough. And I think that's where actually our messaging needs to be better, in that, yes, the price freeze is one thing, right? But if you don't have enough OTs on the ground and you don't have them in there actually providing that improvement in capacity and saving the scheme money, that's a real problem, NDIS. So you need to look at that, and secondary to that is then you need to pay those people well, because look at the return on investment that you then get. But that is that missing piece, I think, that's not there at the moment, where we're not actually saying, it can't just be, well, give us a price rise because you haven't given us one for 5 years, right? Give us a price rise because I can give you examples of showing you how I've saved the scheme X number of dollars in the last 12 months, right? Like I feel like there needs to be a lot more of a savvy kind of sell about why this is important and why it needs to happen.
Yeah. Sarah, you're an absolute gun. You're a fantastic advocate for OTs. And so much so, I believe that you might have received an award last year.
Oh, yeah, I did.
At some kind of special award. Do you want to tell us what that was?
Oh, look, I do currently carry the crown of OT of the year for at least a few more weeks. So
Wear
that
it proudly.
wear it proudly. That was really exciting to be OT of the year. And I believe.
And well deserved.
Thank you so much. So, and I believe there's a number of OTs who are up for the award this year. And I think Chris Pierce, who's been on your podcast before, is one of them. And I met Chris in person for the first time when we were over at the OTA conference earlier this year in June. And he, oh my gosh, the things he does, I'm amazed by. So, and I know there's a number of other finalists who just do amazing things for the OT and the allied health community as a whole. So it's always nice to come together and celebrate those things at the Allied Health Awards.
Yeah. And I think Verve OT might be a finalist again. Well, not again, but a finalist in a different category this year.
Yeah, we are. We're up for Team of the Year, Best Adult Team, and we actually, I'm always really happy to say, like, I think with awards we need to be really just transparent with how they work, right? You can either be nominated or you nominate yourself. Like, let's all be really clear about how it works. And I'm really happy to say I nominated myself for OT of the Year. I'm the best person to sell myself when it comes to writing an award application. And I did the same this year for my team. And I wrote about the fact that for the last 3 years, we've done this fly-in, fly-out service to Griffith, where they were lacking OTs. They were struggling to get assessments done. It started off, it was only meant to be 6 clients that we would see. And over the last 3 years, we've seen 60 clients in Griffith, where we've helped them to get funding in their plan for necessary supports that they had. And so I'm really proud of my team and what we've done there. And so I based our application on that, and we're really lucky to be named as a finalist. So, whether we win or not, it doesn't matter to me. I think it's just great that, so my OT and I will go up for that. She's been the one that's been going down to Griffith for the last few years, and to recognise her and all that hard work she's put in is just really important. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And it is. It's a wonderful celebration of allied health, the Allied Health Awards. It's a fantastic evening. I mean, I'm going to promote ourselves. We were a finalist as well for adult, not this year, way back a few years ago, an OT of the Year as well. So it is a great celebration. And I'm just trying to find Chris's episode. So if you want to know about one of the finalists, Chris was on our podcast. I'm just trying to scroll back to when he was actually on. It's gone missing. But you can certainly hear him on episode 86, where we unpacked the OT Exchange, and we also, let's see, he's gone, there he is, episode 82. It's a way back now. We just did episode 90, which was where we unpacked the changes to NDIS for driving, episode 90, if you want to go and listen to that one, which we referenced earlier. And Chris was on episode 82. You can go and hear about the wonderful work that he's doing over in WA and why he might be nominated for OT of the Year this year. And of course, unpacking the OT Exchange, where Jenny and I interviewed people that were making an impact over there, and that was episode 86. Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Sarah, it's been absolutely wonderful, and it's been a fantastic conversation. And like I said earlier, you're a wealth of knowledge. If people want to listen to your podcast, what's the podcast called?
So it's called the OT Unplugged, NDIS OT Community of Practice. So we catch up every week and talk about what's happening in the OT world. And you can find the podcast on the Verve OT Learning.com.au website. And you can also find all the details about all of our training workshops, including Jenny's workshop, on there. Plus, we also have a membership for OTs working in the NDIS space that want a little bit more help with things as well. So there's lots on offer there.
Well, you've just given yourself a plug. We're going to do a plug for our people that make this show possible. So just stick around, because we're going to ask you our final question.
No worries.
Williams Occupational Therapy focus their attention on helping people with their mobility needs. From driving to wheelchairs, Williams OT provides help to get people mobile.
All right, thank you very much to our sponsors that make this show possible. Before we wind up, Sarah, we always ask our guests one final question, because we've heard so many things with this question, from big holidays to skiing behind a car on a tow rope, all kinds of things. Driving can be so much more than getting from A to B. And we want to hear from you a specific memory or something that's been meaningful for you. As an OT, that's a very powerful word, meaningful. What's something that's happened with a car that's been special to you?
I'm not sure if it's been special, but they're kind of, I don't even know if it's the best memory I have, but it's one of those memories that stuck with me, I think, because it happened to me when I was quite young and as a driver. And it was a bit of a, and I actually haven't told this to my parents. So I usually don't let them listen to podcasts, but if they ever hear this, they'll be like, what? But when I was driving, and I was in my late teens, and I'd got my license, and I had been out one night very late and had a very late night, and then had to drive to and from work the next day when I worked at McDonald's as a casual. And I had my first car accident while I was doing that. And it was really scary as a 19-year-old when you have a car accident, because you're like shaking. And but I actually was doing something in the car that I probably shouldn't have been doing that led to that car accident. And so I actually ran up the back of someone because I was trying to put my earrings and my makeup on while I was driving. And at the time, I told my parents that this had occurred because I had a mozzie bite on my knee, and I was bending down to scratch the mozzie bite, and they believed me. And I feel so bad. I think maybe that's why it stuck with me, the guilt of actually lying to my parents about what I was doing in their car. But they totally believed me, and I ran up the back of a ute. And this guy jumped out of the ute, and I was like, oh my gosh, but he was so nice to me. He was so caring. He got me onto the side of the road, talked me down, taught me through everything. And for me, I think it was a really important lesson of how quickly things can happen when we're driving and if we're not paying attention, and how important it is for any driver, a learner driver, a new driver, to be really aware of what you're doing when you're in the car. So I think if maybe that hadn't have happened, maybe something worse would have happened in the future, but I certainly never did that activity of trying to get dressed and groomed and put my jewelry and everything on in a vehicle ever again. So that's my memory in a car. I know it's probably a weird one, but I don't know, it's just always sat with me, because
lesson learned.
But yeah, and also that guilt of never telling my parents exactly what I was doing. So
I hear you, Sarah.
Yeah.
I'm reminiscing of my first accident. I don't know if you've had an accident, Jenny, or not, but my first accident, I just share this to make you feel like you're not alone,
Yeah, great.
was my year 12 muck-up day. So the last day of year
Oh,
12, where you can't do it at a lot of schools nowadays, but we go in and we decorate the school really
Yes.
early. And I was driving around the back of the school in the 1982 Wheels Car of the Year, a Holden Camira, which
Nice.
is, if you know a Holden Camira, we don't know how it actually got Wheels Car of the Year. It's an absolute bucket of, I won't swear, terrible car. Anyway, we were driving around the back of the gym, and I had a car full of teenage boys, and we were being stupid, and it's all grass, and it's early in the morning, and it was all dewy, and we were going too fast. And then we forgot about this massive drainage dip on the other side of the gym and went sliding front on into it. And the car was stuck down in the ditch with the back wheels up in the air. All the boys kind of piled into the front seat because no one was wearing a seatbelt. That was a big learning curve. And my grandparents had just given me the car as a hand-me-down. And I backed it into the shed that night with the bonnet sticking up in the air. The radiator had been pushed up through the front. It was still able to be driven home, but everything had been bent out of shape. And I remember backing the car in so they couldn't see it. And my parents couldn't see it, so they couldn't see me tell my grandparents, and just trying to hide it and trying to lie. And I don't know how I was going to get through it because the bonnet was sticking up by about 5 to 10 centimeters above where it should
Yeah.
have been. But the things you do under pressure are about lying to
Oh,
parents.
yeah. And that it's a real fright when it happens. Like I can still picture how crumpled the front was and thinking I wasn't even going that fast. Like, and look, touch wood, I've never had an accident since. Like I really did think it kind of made me go, okay, like it's so important that you need to be aware of what's happening around you when you're driving. So, yeah, it's a milestone in life, I think.
Yeah. Very good. Sarah, thank you very much. It's been absolutely awesome. We'll put some contacts up for people that want to get in contact with you. We'll put Verve OT up there. We'll put the link to Verve OT Learning, and we can even put the link through to the
Unplugged.
NDIS Community of Practice
That'd
Facebook
be
group as
great.
well. Is there any other way that people can find you? Are you on the LinkedIns and things like that as
Yeah,
well?
I'm on LinkedIn, Sarah Collison, Verve OT, and I'm always happy for people to email me if they're needing help or direction with something. So sarah@verveot.com.au.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah.
No worries. It's been great to be here.
Yeah, you're a wonderful asset to our OT and NDIS community. So thank you for taking the time to come on our podcast today.
No problem at all.
Driving Well Occupational Therapy loves working with people of all ages and with all kinds of medical conditions to safely give them the opportunity to explore their driving goals. As we wind up this episode, please remember that the advice provided in this podcast is general in nature. For your specific situation, you will need to get in contact with your local OT, vehicle modifier or mobility dealer and set yourself up with an assessment or trial. Trials really do put you in that driver's seat.
If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @DriveAblePodcast for more information.